Abigail and David. In our last story, we witnessed the redemption of Saul. David had the perfect opportunity to take Saul's life and end his suffering as an exile, but chose to show Saul mercy. The two embraced as father and son, and David was restored to good standing among Israel. In this story, we learn that Samuel passes away, and we meet a man named Nabal, who insults David. But the Lord struck Nabal dead, and David marries his wife Abigail, as inspired by the book of 1 Samuel. Israel's great prophet Samuel departed to be with his Lord. All of Israel assembled at Ramah to mourn and bury him. Samuel marked the true end of the era of judges. Samuel's diligence and faithfulness to God was unmatched, and Israel would greatly miss his wisdom. The era of David was approaching, and God was preparing him for great things. David rose up and went down into the wilderness of Paran. There David met some sheep shearers who belonged to the house of a man named Nabal. David hosted the men and showed them great kindness and hospitality. David was elated to meet sheep shearers, for he was once a shepherd and loved speaking to familiar people. David was in need of a home to host a feast for him and his men, so he sent some of his servants to go and greet Nabal in his name. The servants left and entered into Nabal's house. Nabal was a hairy and grumpy man, and unpleasant to be around. However, his wife Abigail was incredibly beautiful and kind. The men asked Nabal if he wouldn't mind hosting them for a feast. Nabal laughed and spat on the floor, saying, "Who is David? He another dog running away from his master? Why should I give my resources to a man I haven't met?" So Nabal shooed the servants away. When David was told this, his anger was kindled. "Every man strap his sword," David commanded, and he took some of his men to go and speak with Nabal himself. One of the young shearers that met David came to Abigail and said, "David sent messengers to ask if they could feast with us, but your husband railed at them ferociously. David was kind to us. They protected us when we were out in the wilderness. Would you consider hosting David since your husband is such a worthless man?" Abigail wasted no time at all and began to prepare food for all of David's men. She gathered meat, figs, bread, and wine. She ordered the young man to go out and tell David there would be a feast waiting for him, and she would ride out after him. Abigail rode after her servant to find David, who had already been on his way to them. When Abigail saw him, she hurried down from the donkey and fell at David's feet. "Please, Lord, do not regard my worthless husband. He is bitter and foolish. Do not muddy your conscience with taking his life. He is not worth killing, and I have prepared a feast for you and your men." David looked at Abigail. She was breathtaking to him. Not only her beauty, but the strength of her character to ride up to meet up. David was enraptured by her, and barely able to speak. David smiled and put his hands behind his head. With a laugh he said, "Blessed be God for you. You have kept me from mindlessly seeking revenge. My heart would have been corrupted for killing your husband. God has restrained me with you, and I am grateful." David took her hand and helped her onto her feet. "Go out in peace." Abigail returned to see her husband throwing his own feast with the food she had prepared. Him and his rotten friends were gorging themselves on food and wine. Nabal was belligerently drunk. His burping and vomiting filled the air, and Abigail was sick at the sight of him. She told him nothing of her meeting with David, for he was too intoxicated to stand up straight. In the morning, Abigail told her husband that she had stopped David from killing him. Out of sheer surprise and a weakened heart from years of gluttony, Nabal died from a heart attack. God had allowed Nabal's own sin to creep up within him and take his life, so Abigail was left a widow. When David caught wind of Nabal's death, he praised God, saying, "God has avenged Nabal's insult for me." So he rode to go and comfort Abigail. The two spoke into the night. They shared stories, emotions, and laughter. The two were married and loved one another deeply. Abigail followed David and his men wherever they went.